And we are back up and running once again. Hopefully, all of my friends here are hopping over to this edition of The Miracle Within. We're looking at edition number 14. I'm not seeing anybody yet, but I'm hoping that people are aware of the video and that the video is coming through. Okay, there's Devin. So, Devin, am I coming through better now, or am I still sounding like a gerbil? I got hearts. Hearts are good. Hello, Dorothy. Sounds good. Okay, so the second launch, everything seems to be working copacetically. And in the first launch, hi, Craig. How are things there in your world? In the first launch, I was rambling on, as I am inclined to do, about our place in space and time. And I was making mention of the fact that this is December 6th. We are on the eve of the remembrance of Pearl Harbor. And how about that? Pearl Harbor is, seems like it's being celebrated all over the world continuously. That's what this material world gives us, is the ongoing conflict, the ongoing issues between light and dark, good and bad, evil and saintliness. And how do we get above that? How do we arrive at a place where we are at peace and we perceive a world surrounding us that is at peace? And Course in Miracles is the avenue that I have been working on. And it has been working magnificently for me. So hopefully it will be working for you as we move forward here on the current of life. And happy birthday to Chara. So December 6th, Sagittarius. Isn't that a fun vibration? Anyway, we are looking at A Course in Miracles, and we are moving forward here now, getting a little bit deeper into some of the dialogue. So what we are going to be looking at right now, this evening, and this is a very good part of the early part of the course. You know, we're actually looking at chapter 3, the innocent perception. And we're going down to section 4, which is error and the ego, so that we can get some insight onto who we really are, because the real battle is this battle of subtleties, where 1 minute we're identifying with the ego and we're judging everything going on around us, and this guy's an idiot, and that person's a jerk, and oh my God, this person down the street is just God incarnate, and we're also driven by these dualistic experiences. And then we come to a place where we calm ourselves down a little bit. And all of a sudden we step into a place of serenity. And that becomes very compelling. That becomes something that we want to engage in more and more and more as we open ourselves up to these ideas being presented to us in A Course in Miracles. So starting off with section 4 here, error and the ego. The abilities you now possess are only shadows of your real strength. My God, that is such an expanded vision of self. You know, because we do have the ability to accomplish a lot of things. And a lot of times, it's simply a matter of desire. If we desire something enough, we can go out and use the power of concentration, the power of the mind to manifest it. But the book here is telling us that this is just a tiny sliver of the true magnitude of who we are and what our powers are. So, and really the powers that we're talking about is not the powers, you know, to force other people to accommodate our belief system. As Jesus told us in some of his ruminations in the New Testament, he pointed out that if you have the faith of a grain of mustard seed, this tiny little speck, you can walk up to the mountain and and say to the mountain, I cast you into the sea, and it will happen. And very few people have attained that level of mind power. But that is the power that lies somewhat dormant in most of us all the time. And if we could actually come to focus and come to understand how the power works, then we can harness it. We can utilize it in our day-to-day existence. And at that point, we'll probably realize that if we walk up to the mountain and say, you know, I'm going to cast you into the sea, it's going to have a very dramatic effect on a lot of people and a lot of circumstances. And we will come to the understanding that that really isn't what we intend or want to do. So it's all in proportion. And the Course in Miracles gives us this much more expanded vision so that we are able to utilize the power in a way that is healing and rewarding and uplifting for all the people that we interact with here on the planet. So moving forward, all of your present functions are divided and open to question and doubt. This is because you are not certain how you will use them and are therefore incapable of knowledge. So we're going back to the idea of the difference between information and true knowledge. And true knowledge is a complete comprehension of the totality of the world that we exist in. You are also incapable of knowledge because you can still perceive lovelessly. See, so throwing the mountain into the sea is more than likely going to be a somewhat loveless action. So this is how we have blocked ourselves from accessing this power that is available to all of us, is that we have arrived at a point where we have dumbed ourselves down to the point where we can only see this visionary world. And remember, in earlier discussions, I reiterate over and over again, if you can see it, taste it, touch it, smell it, or hear it, it's not real. It's ephemeral. It is part of the illusion. It's the same thing when you are in a dream at 2 in the morning and you wake up in a cold sweat and you are being chased by a gorilla who was going to dismember you in the forest. Well, it seemed very real. You could taste it and touch it and smell it, and you were really into it. You really had that experience of that particular nightmare. And that is just a secondary dream within the dream that we are creating, that we are generating right now. So none of this is real. And that's why you can't go back and grab something out of time. You can go back and heal something out of time by forgiveness, but you cannot go back and bring something from the past into this moment and experience it endlessly. See, and that's because we're not living in a real way. We're not living in a real world. So, perception did not exist until the separation introduced degrees, aspects, and intervals. Spirit has no levels, and all the conflict arises from the concept of levels. Only the levels of the Trinity are capable of unity. So that's a big key point here, is resolving our conflicted idea of who we are. And as we step into this space of allowing God to help us remember our true self as God created us, that is the thing that clarifies what reality is for us. We are no longer experiencing that sense of objectification. We are not an object. Nobody else around us is an object. And therefore, there is no hindrance in communication. Because if you really stop and think about it, a big part of this idea of why we created an ego is because it is an investment in the sense of separation. Bodies can communicate through words or through physical actions. You can slap your boyfriend upside the head and cause him to have a second thought or two. But the truth is, real communication is what happens in the mind. And when two minds become joined, something very, very profound occurs. And that is that a third mind comes into play. That is how the manifestation of the Christ occurs. As Jesus told us, when two minds, when two people have arrived at a point where they have communion, then Jesus is also, or the Christ is also present in that experience, in that association. So once again, we're being given over and over again this idea that a physical body is simply a barrier against true communion with not only the rest of humanity on the planet, but with God and the totality of God and the infinity of God. And that's the thing that we have to really put our attention on. Do we want 60 or 80 or 110 years of dragging a body around and then croaking and waking up in a new body and doing the whole thing over again? And once we start to set our sights on getting beyond that act of death, that falling into that pit of darkness and then waking up in a confused state, trying to figure out where the hell we are and what the hell we're doing. And, you know, all of the 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds are engaged in that right now. They're all trying to figure out where they're at and what they're doing. And at the same time, they're growing out of their innocence, step by step by step, as they enter more and more into this realm. So when you have an 8-week-old or an 8-month-old or a 3-year-old, you still see all of that innocence that is captured in that pure form. But as we get older and older and older, we start to lose our connection to the divinity that lies within us. And so in order for us to live a full and rewarding life, we have to reclaim that part that we have walked away from as we were in pursuit of our athletic abilities, of our intellectual pursuits, and our romantic interests, etc., etc. So as we move forward here, it says, spirit has no levels, and all conflict arises from the concept of levels. So a level means that there has to be, that would indicate there is something below you and something above you. And that means that you're living in this separated state. That means that you're living in this fractured reality. The levels created by the separation cannot but conflict. This is because they are meaningless to each other. And really, you know, when you stop and think about it, a lot of your pursuits, a lot of the things that you have these deep desires for, a lot of the things that you feel driven to gain access to or to accomplish in this world, when you step outside yourself and look at it from your neighbor's eyes, a lot of the things that you really hold dear and true are meaningless in your neighbor's mind. And that's what we did, is we created all these different levels of reality in this material world. And we're off and running, chasing the hound. We're in the hunt. And the truth is that there's only one level, and that is what? That is perfection. That is your true self. So I had a little bit of a interesting back and forth dialogue with a fellow from East India who was an astrologer, and he was pursuing me, trying to get me to have him do a chart for me. And I finally said, you know, a chart is just a map of the ego, and it's got things that are added and it's got things that are left out. And I said, I'm really not interested in understanding the ego, because the ego is the Jabberwocky. It is babble. It is nonsense. What I am committed to is to be fully conscious of myself without any aspect of duality separating me from God. And he really had a rough time with that idea, which is kind of funny because there are a lot of enlightened beings in India setting up in their caves in the Himalayas and experiencing totality, non-duality. But as it starts to trickle down, it kind of gets watered down, and people become very aggressive about, you need this. I have something that you need. And this continues to create that idea of levels of awareness. So we are stepping away from all of these different concepts of self and resolving it in the idea that there is only one self, and that self is God. And therefore, I must be without the ego. I must be God. So again, that's a dangerous phrase in a lot of people's minds, because when you share with them that you are God, they identify their ego as being God. And, we can see a lot of reflections of that in the world that we're surrounded by. So especially politically right now, it's being presented to us on every avenue. Are you willing to look at that and recognize the fallacies there and then go back and do your own work? You have to surrender me. You have to surrender that person that you imagine yourself to be in order to step into your true identity, and that true identity is God. So those are pretty profound thoughts, and that's what propels us forward as we are stepping out of littleness and moving into a much bigger way of looking at life and looking at self. Consciousness, the level of perception, was the first split introduced into the mind after the separation, making the mind a perceiver rather than a creator. Consciousness is correctly identified as the domain of the ego. So when we step out of consciousness, when we do attain that altered state of awareness, we have ceased to be the thinker, because the way the mind works is it is always engaged in the act of perception, and it is creating what it is perceiving, and you are believing it. So in our meditations, in our striving to disengage from the ego, what we're wanting to do is calm the mind to the degree that we can literally step out of the ego and start to step into our truth. And that means bringing the mind to a place where it is ceasing all of its activities. When the mind ceases to think, that little person, the ego person, ceases to be. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're pursuing this avenue of spiritual enlightenment, that you're going to annihilate your ego and never be able to access it again. I mean, that's, for most of us, a pretty scary thought, because we've been developing our ego for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years, and we're pretty comfortable with it. But every time we can stop all the brain chatter and dip into that well of absolute quiet solitude, we reconnect with our truth. And that helps us build confidence. That helps us regain our awareness of what it is that we truly desire in life. So silence is the key that unlocks the door to self-awareness. And self-awareness is the awareness of omnipotence and omniscience and omnipresence, because the true self is God. God in reflection. So basically, to containerize it in a single thought, we are one of an infinite number of concepts that God has of itself. And God knows itself to be perfect, and so therefore we are perfect also. We have just hideously distorted reality to the point where we believe ourselves to be these crippled creatures stumbling around on a rock, hurtling through space with nobody really at the helm. And if you look at the religious or political world around you, that's pretty much the state of 2017 as it finally winds down here. The ego is a questioning aspect of the post-separation self, which was made rather than created. It is capable of asking questions, but not of perceiving meaningful answers, because these would involve knowledge and cannot be perceived. So this is living in that realm of trusting that which is unseen and putting all of your attention and belief and expectation on that realm. So we have to live with that awareness that our true life is invisible to us as long as we are engaged in this physical life. But that perfection of who we are is eternal. It's never going to change. So we are engaged in a way of living where we're like Indiana Jones, remember in his third adventure when they were looking for the Holy Grail, and he arrives at that place where he has to step off this ledge, and there is an invisible bridge that is going to support him, that's going to catch him. That's how we have to live in this world. We have to always be willing to take that step off the ledge onto the invisible bridge, and then we can cross those great chasms that life presents to us. We can arrive at a place where the problems that we imagine that we have are answered for us and are resolved on our behalf. So looking at the ego and how it diminishes us, and then looking at the truth of who we are and how it expands us beyond any real concept that we might actually have, is a beautiful journey to this next level where we're moving out of consciousness and moving into a state of such an expanded level of being, not just awareness, but of being, that we know all things are within us. We know that all truth, all beauty, all harmony, all love, all grace, all graciousness reside within us. And the ego really can't even begin to conceive of a world that is this opened up, a world that is this huge, and the ego has the appropriate reaction, which is absolute terror, when it is presented with a concept of self that goes so far beyond the body that, you know, we step out of all limitation. And we are at 8:26 here, so we've got about 5 more minutes. And to continue this, right-mindedness is not to be confused with the knowing mind. So the knowing mind, the knowledge mind, the ego mind that gets all puffed up. I know this, I have the facts, I have the statistics. You know, I love how most statistics are made up in the moment, or at least 85% of them. I just made that up. So a little giggle there for you. But nonetheless, this knowing mind knows that that contrail that is a natural phenomenon of physics from a jet flying at 32,000 feet in somewhat high humidity environment up in that higher level of the atmosphere leaves this trail. Well, a lot of knowledge-based people will look up and say, oh, that's a chemtrail. They're spraying us with all these things that are going to kill life on the planet. See, and that's what knowledge does. It runs down any avenue available. And we have to draw ourselves back from statistics and from facts and from science and from technology and look at those things as useful in the world that we are currently exploring. But we have to know the truth underneath that none of these things are real, because the only thing that is real is God and that eternal state of perfection. So it really comes down to learning how to rightly divide the truth, as Jesus told us. You have to be able to look at the illusion and know in your heart of hearts, this is an illusion. And I'm not going to try to fix the illusion. I'm not going to try to change the illusion, because it's a frickin' illusion. Don't beat your brains out. You can be right-minded or wrong-minded, and even this is subject to degrees, clearly demonstrating that knowledge is not involved. The term right-mindedness is properly used as the correction for wrong-mindedness and applies to the state of mind that induces accurate perception. So you can allow your mind to clarify itself, and that we're doing that through our meditation, through our reconnection to our divine self, so that we start to see the world around us as a reflection of right-mindedness, but it's still a very poor substitute for the perfection that we decided to step out of when we fell into the dream. So that's part of the journey back, is to get away from all of these crazy ideas about what the world really is and what the world really means, because an illusion means nothing. If you put all of your shekels and rupees, if you invest them in this world, guess what? When you croak, you're not taking any of them with you. I mean, you came in bare-assed, and you're going to leave bare-assed. You're not going to take any of this stuff with you. So put your investment of time and effort and study in the one thing that will give you a reward in this world, and that is love. There is nothing else that matters. Love is the bottom line. So it is miracle-minded because it heals misperception, and this indeed a miracle in view of how you perceive yourself. So really what we're trying to do here with all of this, because we have engaged in this illusion, we have confined ourselves and redefined ourselves as a victim of an illusion that we created. How insane is that? And what we are claiming as we start on our journey back to truth is our invulnerability. So stepping out of being a victim is a core process, a core principle of the journey. We can look at all the things going on in our lives and say, yeah, I created that to scare myself silly, to keep myself in a dream, to keep this madness rolling forward. But the real truth is, we don't need to be a victim of the world that we are surrounded by. And one of the affirmations that comes up in the lessons is, I am not a victim of the world I see. And I think that's very important, that we get back to that state of ownership and realize that by our beliefs, we have created a very unpleasant world. And whatever we are afraid of, whatever that we have given our power away to, is going to be something that we are going to have to confront, either in this lifetime or in some other lifetime. So why not start that journey right now? And we're getting closer and closer to the season of light. So as we get toward the last third of the month, we will have the winter solstice. And the days will start growing longer again. The light becomes more white-based, less yellow-based. This is a good time to make a commitment. Pick up a copy of A Course in Miracles. Start off with the lessons with this coming new year and see what happens. You know, and there are literally thousands of teachers like myself out there. If you run into a roadblock, if you have a problem, if you hit a dead end, there are thousands of us here to help you, to support you. We are a community based on love. So anyway, next week we'll continue forward here, looking at the ego and all of the blunders that the ego loves to embrace. And it's kind of like falling down an escalator. It's, like stairs that just don't stop, and you just keep rolling, rolling, rolling. So get out there and do a little Christmas shopping and run around in the snow and or the palm trees if you're down in the tropical quarters, and embrace this season of coming together and celebrating birth, life. Because the truth is, in our pure state, we are in a constant state of being born. We are birthed throughout this universe. We are birthed in God, minute by minute, hour by hour, second by second. And that's the important thing about what A Course in Miracles helps us to remember, is a true state of our being. We are that innocent child that has just come into the world, whether we're in a manger or a mansion, it doesn't matter. You are perfection, and you are love in manifestation. So I'll see you in 1 week. Get out there, share the love, pass the love around, and we'll be chatting soon.